Today we're going to be talking about fake news. Now, there are several types of fake news. Some people have said there's up to 4 different types of fake news, but I would say there are 3 main types of fake news. And I want to go over those with you today using examples. And now I'm going to limit myself here. I'm going to limit myself only to fake news examples from the last 6 weeks. That's right, just fake news since the start of the year. And there's been so much. This should be shocking to you. We're going to use just examples from the last 6 weeks to demonstrate all 3 types of fake news. So let's jump right into it and get into fake news type number 1. This one's easy. This is anytime you're being presented with false information, false facts being presented as truth. The most recent notable example of this that I can think of just off the top of my head, that's how much fake news has been around lately, is the AOC Green New Deal. They posted up an FAQ page and some information about this Green New Deal on their website. And it was discovered that there was a line in this document that essentially stated that they were going to try and figure out a plan to provide people with income who were otherwise unwilling to work. Okay. So what happened? The Twitter sphere, whatever you want to call it, media found out about this. They started spreading this around. Oh, look at how terrible, look at how stupid this is. They want to provide income for people that don't want to work. And then what happened? They got wind of it and they removed it off their site immediately. Okay, so next day, one of AOC's advisors goes on to Tucker Carlson's show and essentially just straight up denies the fact that that document was ever even on there. Or, well, he kind of says that there was a doctor document going around, which is not the document in question. This was their legitimate document that was on their website, and he straight up denies that it ever was even on there. He straight up denies that that line was even on there.
Can I just ask the obvious question? Why would we ever pay people who are, quote, unwilling to work?
We never would, right? And AOC has never said anything like that, right? I think you're referring to some sort of a document that some doctored document that somebody other than us has been circulating.
Oh, I thought that came right from her. That was in the background or from her office, is my understanding.
No.
It's like he doesn't even understand that, once you put something on the internet, it doesn't go away. Okay, that we can see that. We know that was there forever through cached pages and screenshots and whatnot. So that was a blatant example of somebody just straight up lying to millions of people on Fox News, on primetime TV, Tucker Carlson, just lying straight up. False information, fake news. Another good example of false information being presented as true is, well, there's been a couple examples of this. So what we see is, for example, in the Covington case, you see a video, it's absorbed, it's consumed by people that have a certain type of bias, and then they reproduce that bias in the form of their opinion on Twitter. So they see this video of the Covington kids, and then they spew out on Twitter, look at these kids confronting this Native American, they're so racist, they were shouting MAGA, build the wall, and all that kind of stuff. So factually fake in the fact that those kids weren't shouting build the wall. They didn't confront the Indian, the Native American guy. And then, over time, we see the true details, as the story reveals itself. A similar case happened with Jussie Smollett, this actor from the show, what's the show called? Empire? I don't watch it. Apparently, he was walking around at 2 a.m. in Chicago during a polar vortex and happened to run into a couple of MAGA-loving country boys that had some bleach and some rope. And they were just looking for a black person to bleach up and tie up. So he was attacked by people who yelled the words MAGA, this is MAGA country, and called him some homophobic slurs and some racial slurs. So the story kind of just sits around, for a while. We're thinking about it, we're looking at it, we're trying to say, oh, well, is he going to go to the police? Is he going to submit his phone records? Is there going to be proof of this happening? Hundreds of hours of video footage later, police inquiries, everything, trying to get phone records, refusal to submit phone records. It started out as a type 1 false news story, fake news. just, factually incorrect. But we didn't have enough information at the time. However, it evolved into type 2 fake news almost immediately. Because what we see is people making conclusions, just like the Covington story. They make conclusions based off of their bias, and then they spread that around. So what we saw was, people saying, this was a racist attack. There's no question about it, even though we know nothing other than what this guy said. There's no question. It's a racist, homophobic attack. And this was the narrative that was being spread around. That there are homophobic, racist Trump supporters. That's the narrative that they always want to try to portray, is that Trump supporters are racist and homophobic, and they love to carry around bleach in polar vortexes, apparently. So it evolved into this narrative that got just carried away into the wind all over Twitter and all these media places that were sharing stories about how homophobia is so rampant, and it's so hard to be black and gay in America. So it's almost like you can tell that they want these realities to exist. They want this reality of black homophobic oppression to exist, so that they can spread this narrative. It's like it's just waiting inside. It's waiting right at the tip of their tongue. It's just, they can't wait. At the second that something happens, it could even be semi-twisted into something that can perpetuate that narrative. They're going to run with it. They're going to grab it and they're going to run with it. So it turned into this narrative of Trump hate. Basically, this was supposed to be a hate crime against blacks and gays, but it got me wondering: is it a hate crime to do try and pin a crime on Trump supporters and white people in general? Because now we're seeing this narrative about how the MAGA hat is the new KKK hood. And it's stories like this that have short lifespans that perpetuate that narrative. Okay, so this Jussie Smollett story is going to die. Nothing's going to come out of it. No journalists are going to be reprimanded. No media outlets are going to be reprimanded. But this narrative of the MAGA hats are the new KKK hoods, that's going to perpetuate into existence. So this MAGA hat thing, that's a new, the whole Trump supporters are racist, bigots, et cetera, et cetera. That narrative is a very deep-seated, false, fake news narrative that has been in place since, even before the election. The seeds of that narrative are being planted because they have no way to factually, rationally explain their loss. So they have to explain it in other ways. And that's what all the buzzwords on the planet can't explain away that loss. Bigot, racist, homophobic, et cetera, et cetera. So we have this gigantic underlying narrative, false narrative, fake news that we're all living under now. We're all living above. We have this layer of Trump supporters are racist, bigots, homophobes. That's fake news type 2, false narrative. Another politically related false news narrative that we're dealing with is the Russian collusion. Now, there's actually been some developments, coincidentally, recently. I think NBC essentially admitted that there was no collusion at all. We've been hearing about this Russian collusion thing, Russian collusion this, Russian collusion that. What we've had zero proof of any kind of collusion over the past 2 years. And if you were paying attention to the news way back during the election time, and when Hillary started making excuses for her losses, you remember the inception, the birth of that idea of the Russian collusion. And I'm still back there in 2016 wondering when the DNC is going to give the FBI access to their servers so that we can verify that there was actually hacking. But I think we all know that's never going to happen. But that's where my mind is still. So now we have this other underlying fake news that we're all living on. Okay, every day we're walking on this like sludgy quicksand of false fake news that white people, Trump supporters, are racist, and that there's this Russian collusion and that Russia owns all of our politicians. Fake news, guys. Okay, false narratives. No proof. whatsoever. It's just something that's been perpetuated. Once you say something enough over and over and over, and you keep saying it, people start to believe it. And then at a certain point, you just operate based on the fact that that's a truth. Like it just becomes ingrained in your skull that that is a truth, even though you've never observed any truth regarding that narrative. So that's type 2. Type 3 fake news. This kind of feeds into the type 2 and 1, actually. This is the source of a lot of our problems these days, and that's algorithmic fake news. So algorithmic fake news is, for example, now I know I'm using a lot of political references here just because this is the easiest, but if you, for example, search for the Donald, if you want to search for the subreddit, the Donald, on various search engines, as you see here, it comes up as a autofill suggestion for every search engine except for Google. Now, this is a good example of algorithmic fake news because if the search results were purely left to the organic, results of reality, what was actually happening, the popularity of the Donald subreddit, if that of all the algorithm looked at was purely the popularity, then you would see that result in the top fill results, just like you see it in every other search engine. But in Google, it's not there. Now, why is that? Because at some point in time, somebody at Google, I'm not saying this is necessarily a decision made in a boardroom full of people. It could have just been one guy that adjusted the score on a keyword. But regardless of how it happened, we're seeing results that aren't consistent with reality in not just Google results, but Facebook feeds, Twitter feeds. And Jack Dorsey has even admitted to this. He just admitted to it recently in a Twitter thread, a long interview on Twitter, where he talked about how they utilize their machine learning. He refers to it as machine learning, but it's an algorithm that deranks people who they deem as bad actors. Now, what does bad actors mean, really? Do they have a definition of bad actors on Twitter's website that I can go and view so that I know exactly what that means and I can not be a bad actor inadvertently? No, they don't have that. That's one of those things that stays in their algorithm. You don't ever get to see that. You don't ever get to see the algorithm. And that's kind of the point. This type of fake news is something that you can't see and you can't prove unless you have your hands in that algorithm. So when you're seeing doctored Twitter posts, the order, the ranking of your Twitter posts, certain suggestions on Facebook trending news, which was another big one. They actually admitted to doctoring and squelching and suppressing. I was about to say oppressing, but you may as well say oppressing. They were suppressing conservative news stories on Facebook. They were just, they would just derank them. And this has been admitted to by people who used to work there. And so you're seeing this algorithmic adjustment happening across the board on all the platforms that we use to consume our information. And, when you control the inputs to a system, you have a pretty good idea or pretty good control over, the output. So is this going to be used, for example, to try and manipulate the 2020 elections? A good documentary that I would recommend on this topic, I think it's on Amazon Prime Video, is The Creepy Line. It's essentially all about how Facebook is being used, these social media companies are being used to manipulate, and how they can be used to manipulate news media. So those are the 3 types of fake news. Okay, so now when you're looking around, hopefully you're going to see everything in a little more of a matrix type code where you can see what's going on behind the scenes of a story. So when you see something that says, children shouldn't have to live this way because somebody posted a Twitter picture of a child who wrote, I love you, Mom, because the child had to go on a fire drill. That's fake news. What they're trying to do is implant an idea in your head that we need gun control. Why do we need gun control? Because school shootings are rampant. So it's, they're trying to plant that idea in your head in a very subversive manner. So just keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. Other noteworthy fake news stories since the beginning of 2019 include the AOC dancing video and the Type 2 fake news surrounding the narrative, the false narrative that conservatives they hated her or they were upset about her dancing for some reason. They thought that was disgraceful and, stuff like that. Type 2 false narrative fake news. The Trump ordering Cohen to lie, that was also false. That's type 1 fake news, just straight up false information, factually inaccurate. The Covington one, which we covered, and the Jasmine Barnes story from Sean King, of course, that was type 1 and type 2 fake news. So it was type 1. Well, actually, no, that was mostly just type 2 fake news, because the narrative from the start, even though we had no facts, all the facts were reported accurately, and that, this woman was shot, and the girl was shot at, and that there were some witnesses, they saw a truck, but the narrative from the start was that it was a white guy, and this was a racist attack. Somehow they knew, I don't know how, they're psychic, or I don't know what the deal is, but they knew that it was a racist white guy from the beginning, with no evidence, not even knowing who the shooter was, even though the shooters were 2 black guys. The narrative was that, again, the white people were evil. Do you notice how all these fake news stories seem to have a similar kind of narrative to them? That white people are bad and that minorities, LGBTQ, are good? I don't know if that's just a coincidence or not. And take everything you read with a grain of salt. So this is a good note to end it on. Okay, so even if you see something that you think is true, that you would like to be true, okay? So if I'm a rabid leftist foaming at the mouth and I see a white kid staring in the face of a Native American, I want white supremacy to be true. I want to share the story, and I want to say, look at this racist little white kid disrespecting this Native American indigenous person. Like, I want that. This is, the MAGA hat is a new Nazi hat. I want to spread that narrative, right? Okay? But you gotta hold that back, okay? That's the ability to withhold gratification. You gotta just hold that back, okay? There was a story about a guy who had his dog killed by a anti-Trump person. Essentially, his husky was killed by someone who killed it because the guy supported Trump. That was the original story that came out. People were sharing this, saying, oh, this is getting out of control. And I even saw Mike Cernovich on that same Twitter post kind of asking for more details like I was. But yeah, there was a part of me that wanted to share that story and say that the leftists are out of control, everybody. This is the start of the Civil War. But there wasn't enough facts. There wasn't enough factual information and evidence source-wise to be able to confidently share that story and say, this is what's actually happening. So what I do, I advised people to hold off. I held off. I didn't share it. And what happens? The next day comes out that the dog was actually killing the neighbors' animals, so they shot it. It wasn't a MAGA attack. It wasn't MAGA country out there too, or anything like that. It's just something happened that was attributed to a political narrative, and it wasn't. That's fake news. That was fake news. Okay, I almost shared fake news, and decided to hold off. So you got to be able to withhold that gratification. Okay, it's a personal thing. Have some discipline. Don't give in to your emotions so easily. So if you see fake news from the right, drop it in the chat. We'll talk about it. If you see fake news from the left, drop another comment. I'll add it to the list. We'll talk about it. Otherwise, stay tuned. I'm going to try and keep a track of all the fake news in 2019, and we'll make sure to talk about it when it happens right here on the Weekly Narrative.